It's an honor to have Professor Ferdi Meyer next to me. Ferdi, welcome. I look forward to the discussion.
Thanks very much to you, and thanks very much, Davy, for having us here this day.
Davy, again, for FNB Agriculture, thank you very much. Ferdi, I want to start this conversation with the current pressure on input costs. We're sitting in a situation where, yes, the prices are nice and high, but we'll get to the prices just now. If a farmer has to make decisions, and we know where the input cost situation is, what is your prognosis and what is your advice?
Yeah, so Theo, there are so many things, and luckily we have a good audience of farmers here also, and we can have a good discussion about it, and also we need some time on it. So in essence, if you just, it's all about the margins at the end of the day. So it's your input-output cost relationship, the timing of that, and your cash flow. And those are the kind of, if you can manage, so we've seen these output prices increasing and continuing to rise based on messages in the world that we'll talk about in a moment. But on the input cost side, we've seen a rapid rise. Despite of the rise to you, we can still look at positive margins. And you know how we can see this very easily? Farmers are responding positively. So we're actually seeing an expansion. Let's just look at our winter area planted. The intentions to plant, we'll see what's actually going to be planted. But it's very much in line with what we had expected in our projection, saying margins, despite of higher input costs, taking the current canola, wheat, barley prices into consideration, there are still positive margins to make. Even the summer crop currently that we're harvesting, there are very good margins, because although prices of inputs were already up last year, they're not as high as now, and we're getting very good output prices. So good margins now in the harvesting of summer crop, and even in the winter crop that we're planting now, or that's partly been planted, there are still positive margins to make.
So the two elements, and then we can get to the cash flow. The one element is the input cost. But if you look at the input cost at these high levels, only create the margin because the commodity price is high. The fundamentals around that commodity price, what are you seeing?
Yeah, that's amazing to you. So, let's just talk about wheat. We had 2 years ago, we had wheat prices of $230. Now we're sitting world prices of $450, $430, $450. Maize prices were at around $160, $160 a ton, now at $350 a ton. So obviously, we've seen it in the media, prices have rapidly increased. But what constantly just amazes me, if we carefully assess fundamentals, in other words, supply, demand, and stock levels.
Internationally, you talk
internationally,
about international
correct.
stock levels.
Yeah, and then we could talk about South Africa. So what's amazing is that the international stock levels are actually, or let's put it differently, the world prices do not reflect current stock levels. Now, what I mean by that is, if we look at the previous commodity cycles, we all know we've got these soft commodity, agriculture commodity prices are moving in cycles. Let's look at the 2007 and 8 one, because there we had really high prices, similar to what we're having now, wheat and maize. Oil seeds are currently higher. But if let's just take wheat, because we had the message now out of India, and we can talk about that in a moment. But, in 2007-8, stock-to-use ratio was at 21% for wheat. In other words, the stock levels of wheat were at 21% of the global consumption of wheat. Currently, we are at 32% projected for the coming season. So even taking Russia and Europe into consideration, we are still at stock levels much higher than what we saw in 2007 and 8.
In theory, your textbook will tell you that leads to soft prices.
Well, at least not as high as what we're seeing now. So wheat stock levels were extremely high for many years. So let's say 3-4 years ago, we had stock levels at 35, 37, 38%, very high. And then we start with some drought effects, and then came this big shock of the invasion. And even with Ukraine it depends on if they're going to plant in October or not. But even with that disruption and the ports being disrupted in the Black Sea, we still have stock levels of 32%. Now, look at the wheat price in 2007-8. The wheat price was also over $400, at a stock level of 21%, and now we're sitting at 32%, and still we have a wheat price above $400.
So if we then were to speculate, what drives the current high price? Because clearly it's not stock levels.
Yeah.
It's something else. How would you attribute that to the high price?
Yeah, so Tia, I think we can sit and speculate here together. You're also a specialist in this field. I think it's uncertainty. So it's a combination of supply chain disruptions due to COVID. Shipping rates are much higher, availability of shipping, issues with the ports, and I think the world is just generally much more uncertain. So, you get the message. Let's take India. India is a huge consumer and producer of wheat, but they're a very small exporter of wheat.
So the weekend's announcement that India is banning exports of wheat, that might not be that big.
Exactly, in global context level. So if you that's exactly right. So if they're going to ban their exports, they are around about number 10 in the world if it comes to export volumes. They are exporting around 6 to 8 million tons of wheat. And if we look at Russia, they're exporting 35% of global exports of wheat. So India's shock was not as big as Russia's shock, but the world market is so sensitive now, so nervous, that any kind of additional information that's added to it, even if it's small, just increases the level of uncertainty.
Let's close this circle on the grains. So this year, farmers are going to enjoy a very high margin cash flow profits. It's going to be an incredible year. If you were to look at the big four grains and you multiply the expected volume with the average price, it is in real terms extensively more than the last 10, 20, 30 years. So there's a massive cash flow coming into these guys, a massive cash flow. Yes, costs are higher, but there's a massive cash flow coming in. Your advice on farmers sitting with this bumper cash flow coming in, how should one approach that?
Yeah, so that's such a tricky one. So first of all, what's interesting is, let's just look at the maize crop. So we are sitting now with an estimated crop of 14.7 million tons. Last year it was 16.7, but our prices are higher
That's
this
the point. It's if you look at the price and the volume, you get to a very profitable amount, even after the high cost.
Even after the high cost, correct. So our year, and we shouldn't be, we've got a basis effect now. We're having our second, third year in a succession of fantastic prices. And revenue and good crops. So, I mean, this is just commercial agriculture at its best. And this is just a blessing for the country and the global perspective that we are in. But let's take it back to your question. I think for me, the timing issue around what is going to happen, how long will output cost last at this
high level of output?
This high level of input. Because if you get the timing wrong, that could be a problem. Just imagine you're sitting and you're going to buy and you're going to say, you know what, you can afford a nitrogen price of 13,000, 15,000 Rand a ton. You can afford it because you've got a maize price of 4,200, 4,300. You can do this thing. You've got good yields and you've had good yields over the last 2-3 years. The question is then, if you don't fix your price and you pay for those inputs and this price comes down with 1,000 Rand a ton, then the margin is gone. So you carefully have to plan this situation. So saying, and I would, my recommendation would be, let's just lock in whatever your input costs are with your output price. Even try a very affordable put option, or some share of your crop that you can start to hedge your prices for next season. Because we don't know what happens. If you just look at climate, we've had 3 good seasons now. And we've seen the previous good seasons and kind of the cyclical behavior of La Nina and El Nino. Let's say we hit a drought next year. So I would set my cash flow and I would kind of, in the area, if you still have to settle some old debt, settle that debt. That's step number 1. Get on top of your payments. Even take one payment ahead, like at your one payment ahead. And that cash that you still have, the surplus, that you can invest in technology, new machines, replacement that you haven't managed to get over the last 5 or 6 years. So I would carefully plan, and the key is to plan the input output to link those two prices together.
And make sure you fix a margin.
Correct.
For me, there's always in any of these financial markets, when you talk to people, the scary argument for me is always that people say, this time it will be different, it's never going to come down. There's a new level was set for the price. Well, history tells you that's never the case. And the problem that people make is they look at current price structures and extrapolate that. That is not going to happen.
Correct.
The price, I don't know if the price is going to double or halve, but it can do either.
Yeah.
And people must be careful with that volatility to assume this time it will be different. It is never different. And that's a mistake a lot of people make.
Correct. And the one that just to get back to these stock levels, that's the one that I'm worried about, because I hear and I read a lot on where analysts saying, this time's going to be different. We're going to see prices cannot come down that fast.
Yeah,
we're going to see 2, 3, 4 years down the line. I'm not so sure about that.
Yeah, that's my problem.
If we have good stock levels and we suddenly have, we know it only takes 10, 15 million tons globally to switch this market around. And if the shipping rates start going in, I'm not saying that prices are going to collapse next year. But I'm just saying, look out. Look out and be careful.
Don't work on the assumption that this price will last.
Correct.
It might go up, might go down, but don't work on that assumption.
Exactly. So I think that fundamentally, agriculture has taught us, and even our own farmers, they've shown us, if incentive is there, we can expand, we can respond very quickly, despite of overly wet season, overly dry, late plantings. The world now, and the commercial farming, let's say, society has geared up to such an extent that you can really absorb a lot of external shocks to actually get that crop in, to get it financed, to get it harvested. So it's actually amazing.
And you add technology on top of that.
Yes.
And you get to a different world. I want to change away from grains a bit. The conundrum where we sit in terms of exports, and I see there is some farmers here that export different produce to international markets. We are in a situation where we have challenges in terms of harbour infrastructure in South Africa. We've got delays in ports worldwide with congestions, and then you have markets that's disrupted in terms of fruit produce that were going to Russia, all of a sudden struggle to get to Russia, and now that same produce need to find the same new markets where there is supply chains. Let's start to look a bit about that portion of the agriculture market, and first of all, your synopsis of these challenges.
Yeah. So Theo, I think these port challenges have been coming for quite some time. I think in the BFAP baseline, we started talking about these challenges in 2017 when we saw the rapid expansion in irrigated high-value crops. We're sitting now at 70,000 hectares more of high-value crop.
And they need to
irrigate, correct. So our projection, just extrapolating those hectares and the produce that's going to come into production over time, we are projecting 50% increases in volumes through our ports by 2030, and we can't even handle the current volumes. So we've got this is a big time bomb that's been coming, and I think we've just hit it quicker, even faster than what we projected. So this is so big that if you talk to the fruit farmers, what they're currently experiencing in the ports is worse than the Russian-Ukraine invasion on their own financial situation. So we're currently sitting, if you talk to the table grape guys, they need to be in the market in 2 weeks' time, 3 weeks' time. They are sitting, or let's say 20 days. They're now sitting with 50 days onto the market. That's impossible. You're basically losing your crop. So this is a big issue to you. So I would almost say, as I know from a humanitarian perspective, the war is awful. If you look at cash flow in the pocket, our current port issues are bigger than the war. We have a significant challenge in our ports.
Now obviously that challenge is not something that can be resolved quickly. It needs various partners to come to this party. It is addressed in the master plan of agriculture, but the point with these master plans is usually the implementation side of it. And I know that you've provided technical input on most of these. How confident are you that that challenge is actually surmountable? Because what I have seen, and not only this year, is I have seen export produce ending up in the local market. And you can see that in terms of volume and quality, and you'll probably see that in the price to the detriment of the producer. Yeah. To what extent can that challenge be overcome?
No.
Or is that one of those bottlenecks that unfortunately will start to push all the way back to the farmer and create different decision making in the whole value chain? What's your view?
Yeah, I think it has already pushed back. I think it has already pushed back, and we've reached a point, and it just kind of, as I said, I think COVID and what we're experiencing now in global market has just fast-tracked the issue that we've actually been talking and pointing to for some time. So, Theo, I think what the important part is of the master plan for me is that we've narrowed down on a certain interventions that we need to focus on. So what we really try to do is get down to let's call it a short list. We know we've got a long list of things that we need to do, but let's at least get agreement among social partners on a short list of interventions, things that we need to focus on, that we need to work on together. And you're mentioning the ports. There are a lot of opportunities where private sector can really play a big part. Ports, it's a tricky one. There are various departments involved, and there are groups in agriculture, organized agriculture, that are doing a fantastic job to coordinate and to work with government on these topics, bring the government officials in there. I think from a research perspective, we need to really do our level best to get numbers onto the table, the cost benefits, and to say, colleagues, it is what's costing the country in terms of jobs, in terms of lost GDP, and the problem's just getting worse. So I think everybody has to play a role. I think there's a lot of good work already done, and a lot of kind of realization saying, guys, we're in trouble. And we need to work on it. What can private sector do and what can government do? Because these are big costs here. These are, infrastructure costs are huge. So I think in the master plan, the benefit is at least that we've narrowed that down, saying let's agree the following. Whether you are commercial, emerging, labor, government, they've all agreed saying this is what it is. Now labor will still come on board, hopefully, but I mean all the other social partners, there's agreement saying these are the big points and we need to focus on the ports. So hopefully that will at least put some more pressure on implementation.
Otherwise, this whole great expansion of agriculture, of irrigation, of technology is going to end up somewhere in a bottleneck. And it's just not going to get through that bottleneck.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's, we wrote a paper in Africa, and that's just where you can see it firsthand. Your African markets, if you just look at maize production, let's take Malawi as a good example. You know that the cheapest maize in the world is still currently in Malawi. Starting to dribble up again, but last year by far, $110 a ton.
Now, why would that be?
The reason for that being is because they had a surplus, but they have a lack of off-farm processing infrastructure and getting the surplus out of the market. So they
can't get it out of the country. They can't move the surplus.
They do informal trade across the borders, but to get to real ag processing. So their numbers, they need about 3 million tons, 2.7, 3 million tons of maize locally. If they produce more than that, it just collapses. So, this is like your import parity, export parity. If you produce a surplus, your prices go to export parity and you get it out of your market. But their band is like this. For South Africa, we maybe have a 30% difference between the highest and the lowest price.
And that's cost of either move or moving in or out.
Exactly.
It's a cost now. It's even in our case, it's a cost number.
Exactly. It's a cost number. Either you ship it out to deep sea and you deduct all the prices from the world price, or you have to bring it in. Now, for Malawi, 2 years ago, when they had the drought, they were at $300 for maize, and now they're at $110. So what you're seeing, and this is just like a perfect example of poor infrastructure, lack of investment in beyond the farm gate, agro-processing, They don't have enough, like feed industries, not well developed. There are some feed industries, but they need a more consistent development of bigger feed mills. It's there and it's growing, but they need more of that.
So that is the risk if you enclose yourself in an island. Your supply and demand cannot, your demand cannot sustain the supply if there's an oversupply.
Correct. So you have, and Zambia was another one. So you can have a look at Zambia. Rapid expansion in maize production now is kind of moving sideways. Rapid expansion in soybeans, now it's moving sideways. Rapid expansion of wheat, now it's moving sideways. In each one of those commodities, they flipped from a net importer to net exporter, but now they can't grow anymore because they've got this cap. If you take Zambian maize through, let's say they would go to Beira or they would go to Durban. Or maybe if the rail track works out to Dar es Salaam, but they're landlocked. So they need to get their product out. And they've got a surplus. So they can either process it, or they need to get it out, or they need to switch crops. And that's why it's so important to bring it back to South Africa, why it's important that we need to have market access, that we need to get our ports, that we need to get our roads and our rail, everything online, because it's essentially going to put a cap on our growth, on our agro-processing, on diversification of crops.
I want to move the discussion slightly towards, we have a challenge in South Africa in getting more people involved in the agriculture sector. And part of that challenge lies in the fact that there's a massive yield gap between commercial farmers and smaller new entrants. And that it's a difficult situation. I know that you have done quite a bit of work on specifically on that and on how one can change that skew equilibrium. Where are you in that?
Yeah, so I think the first argument, and there was one of our researchers recently published a PhD on kind of exiting of commercial farmers and consolidation, all of those, and that's obviously a sensitive debate, and you know, if we look at Stats SA, their survey, we know that we're not capturing to a large extent VAT farmers that are not registered for VAT. So under, you know, we kind of, in the commercial survey, we're looking at a certain size of farmer. Now, strictly speaking, you know, when you're a commercial farmer, when you start to produce more than your household, when you start to sell into the market, that's probably commercial. You're starting to become commercial. So you have small commercial, large-scale commercial. So to make things easy and to kind of categorize it, I would say we have, you know, if we look at Stats SA numbers, and we've kind of triangulated different surveys, whether it's household survey, census data, we've tried to create some order around these numbers and saying, let's just assess the situation. We have about 40,000 commercial VAT-registered farmers, about 300,000 smallholder farmers, of which a lot of them are producing surpluses, and we have 2 million households that are involved in agriculture. And you know, that's where I think, and we've talked about this right back in the days of the NDP, of Chapter 6. That's where we see this, if we just understand South African production and consumption environment in that way, saying the commercial farmers will still produce the bulk of food.
That's the 40,000.
That's the 40,000 plus their 300 feeding into these commercial chains. And they're big. We just don't measure them.
And so let's just work around that. So first of all, the 40,000, how would you compare that to 5 and 10 years ago? And number one. And number two, people sometimes saying, I'm not sure how technical correct is it, that for the last 10 years, I think the average age of a farmer is like 58 or something. How accurate is those, first the age numbers and the tendency in the numbers, and then I'll come down to the 300,000 and the 2 million.
Yeah, the age numbers, I don't have in my head now, but I know that the commercial number, this 40,000 has been coming down.
Yeah, and I think that's worldwide.
Worldwide, it's coming down in South Africa.
And that's a margin scale discussion.
Yeah, and it's not hectares. I recently somebody saying, but we won't have enough farmers to farm and actually have South Africa food secure. That's not correct.
The hectares will be farmed.
The hectares will be farmed, and in fact, I always say there's like 200,000 hectares here out in the West that is marginal to a sense when prices are continuously low, we'll see those 200,000 hectares out. And if they're good, they're back in. And now, well, they're back in again. So we've seen actually expansion in hectares over the recent years.
So
significant
farms
expansion.
are getting bigger.
Farms are getting bigger. It's true. The debate is where are those the commercial number, and this is where the definition kind of becomes funny. So let's talk about the 40,000. The 40,000 number is coming down to you in that bracket. But we are not measuring a lot of other commercial activities that are actually also there doing great economic business.
Those are the 300,000.
Those are the 300. Now, just to give you a practical example, we did some detailed work for the pork producers when they had the African swine fever. And we really tried to map how big is this production really. And we got to the households, we took everything that we could get, and we went out and did surveys. We surveyed these little operations, households with 20 pigs, 50 pigs in their household, and we started simulating their economic model. And you know what we got to? It's amazing. There are, in that, if you just look at that, there are 26,000 jobs created by these little small-scale commercial operations. So that's why, getting back to this argument, do we have more commercial farmers or less? It becomes difficult, because I think there's a hidden middle that's doing a lot of operations, a lot of cash. They might have a bank account. They're definitely not VAT registered.
And they're sitting here in the enterprise.
They're sitting there, and they are running a very effective, critical element around food security.
Specifically in the environment.
Yes, they're doing a great job. They're doing a great job. These little pigs, they are being fed, they're being sold, they're being slaughtered, but they're not, I would argue 60-70% we don't even capture in the market, but it has a huge contribution to food security. With grains, it's sometimes easier to track, but I think we're missing a big section there. So your question around commercial, I think that the 40,000 we know. There we have more robust numbers, and that number's getting smaller. Consolidation, bigger farms.
But the 300,000.
But the 300,000, I think there's a lot of vibrancy in that market, and that's the market where I think we can capture a huge opportunity. You talked about the yield gap just now. We did a detailed survey now in the Eastern Cape, just again looking at what's the natural resource potential, what are the farmers achieving, what could they achieve, and there's a huge gap. So we know that there are effective, if we think about Grain SA's farmer development program, taking those farms from 2 tons to 4 tons comfortably, just farming practices.
And they also don't need the best technology, they just need technology.
Exactly.
That's what I also,
Basics.
for me, they don't need the last 5 years absolute top-end tech. They just need proper technology.
Yeah, absolutely.
The 2 million?
The 2 million, that's an interesting one. So those are mainly households producing for their own use and occasionally selling for surplus. And those are, again, those yields are even lower than your 300. So your 300 target, I think there we can have commercial yields very quickly. We can map them. We need to know where they are. We need to get information out there. I think they are bankable. Maybe the banks, I think you can come in here as well, but I think they could be bankable if we think about value chain finance, because they are very much in the bracket what we see in the rest of Africa. A 10-hectare or 15-hectare farmer is very common in Africa being financed, and there are products for it. So I think having a debate around that, but the households, that's where, this is like this big broad base. I think critical for food security, but the opportunity of extension services, getting
just basic extension services.
Basic extension services, I think would already make a great difference in their lives, to at least get a little bit of lift on their normal operations, their day-to-day operations.
I want to take that discussion one step forward. Obviously, we're focusing on the 40,000 because they are the guys that can compete with or have a product at Tesco's or have a product in an international supermarket. These guys here in the middle, how do they manage the question of margin in terms of scale? Because obviously you can only do that in products that is scale neutral.
Yeah.
Because you can't, any product that requires scale to be profitable can't be in this Or am I wrong?
No, you're right. You're right, and I think that's where the argument comes in to say, well, let's just take from practical examples. The wool growers, they're running an amazing program on wool growers, and those farmers to a large extent are kind of in, let's say, this 300,000. Some of them already tipping into the VAT registered kind of bracket. Those turnover numbers on scale. Some of them fall way below that. But they're running an effective operation. So, too, I think a lot of them, if you look at the household data, a lot of them have off-farm income, other sources of income coming into the household, whether these are pensions, child grants. So you're not creating a sole income from farming at a lower level. It has to grow over time. So the scale has to come in for the farmers. Actually, if we think about your return to family living, a lot of these farmers, even if you think about the wool growers, if they're still small, it's not sufficient for full household.
They need other sources.
They need other sources. They need other sources, but this source is certainly making a big contribution. We compared in the Grain SA, the Farmer Development Program, we took similar households in that area that were not farming, and we looked at these farmers that were on this program. And you could just see the kick up in their income from farm, but it didn't replace all the other income that these households were having.
They still needed that.
They still needed it. So the bottom line, it's making a contribution, and we're starting to utilize natural resources, which we need to get going. We have a lot of operations or opportunity out there. And I think that's what it gets down to, saying, how can South Africa increase its total food security status by focusing on these areas where we have the opportunity, where farmers can start to produce. But the reality is, too, there's a last one on this, is we still have an urbanizing population. We must not forget that. And we still have the biggest number of low-income households in cities. We have the biggest concentration in rural areas, but we have the biggest number of low-income households in cities. And that's where we need these big commercial operations, just to make sure
pump food into that.
To pump food into that system big time.
Affordable, healthy, predictable, that kind of...
Exactly.
I want to touch on a point that might be slightly sensitive, but a show like Nampo, where we are here, I'd say the vast majority of agriculture companies are targeting this 40,000. If I look at the equipment, if I look at the technology, and even if I look at our traditional big agriculture companies, the old cooperatives, they are structured to service a commercial farming operation. They are expectant of the farmer to have a truck infrastructure, to have a certain quality infrastructure at the farm gate. To what extent is our agriculture business sector geared towards assisting this 300, I'm not really talking about the 2 million, this 300,000 band financially, logistically, assisting them with inputs? Do we have enough commercial agricultural operations to assist that scale farmer? Because I sometimes think it's not the case.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the short answer is you're correct. I think we're not servicing, we're not geared for that sector, and that's a huge challenge. That's a big challenge, and part of that lies in the fact that we don't know enough about the sector. We don't have good information, and I think we need to really work on that part. And then secondly is the scale and the risk involved in this. So if you're a commercial business and you have these, let's say the 40,000, where are you going to do your business? Where's the lowest risk, easiest business to do is in that over the short run. But too, I think and I mean, we know this, and we want to get the inclusive drive in South Africa. It's so critical because socio-politically, that's, if I look at a risk perspective and just where the country needs to go, that's where we need to put our focus on, saying let's unpack, let's understand, let's get information around the sector, put it together and de-risk to a large extent, to really try to get the extension services in there, get the finance in there, understand where are these farmers, how are they operating, how do their supply chains operate. And that's still boggling my mind. You know, if you think about Kenya, Ghana, those countries that are really moving fast, they are well ahead of us if it comes to financial products, where you can actually finance these products throughout the value chain. And I think we have the technology available. So we are recently, from BFAP's side, we have now launched an initiative called the Roadmap to Inclusive Agriculture Transformation. And from our side, we just also want to make a contribution in this space, saying this data is just not available. We've talked about it for a long time, but what we're going to do is just start to piece together data that we have, bits and pieces. Everybody's doing something in this space. But
let's try to consolidate.
Let's start to consolidate just in terms of how we're measuring, where are they, you know, what's the size or the operations that are involved, and what products, that we can start to develop the correct financial products, whether it's mechanization, whether it's seed technology.
For that sector
exactly, that you can start to really understand your client and know where your client is and also where the opportunities are.
I want to ask you, just verify a point that I'm not 100% sure. Is it true that 40% of our cattle stock lies in that 300,000?
Yeah, I have to get my livestock unit just to confirm that, and I'll get that number.
Because that's a number that's always banded around.
Correct.
40% of our total cattle herd is not in the commercial sector, but their share of the commercial value chain is very, very small.
Yes.
Simply because it's not that throughput system that you have, but 40% of the herd is in these developmental farmers.
So the number of the herd, the size number, that's something that we've verified through our various systems of whether these are, because what you essentially have to do, you have to look at household numbers. Household surveys tell you who owns what. Do you own cattle? How many cattle do you, like in the 0 to 10 bracket? So those spatial maps, we've built those, and kind of the concentration of those maps. And colleagues can look on our baseline. Last year, it's the report, you can download, it's on our website free of charge. In that livestock chapter, we've kind of mapped out exactly where they are, what the concentration, where are these cattle. So your 40% is correct. To what extent do those cattle land in the commercial chains? That's what we need to do some homework on. And to say, to what extent are they actually coming to our feedlots and into the commercial chains, or are they actually sold into the rural value chains?
Or are they for a lot of people, and I'm not just speculating, it's a carrier of wealth. It's a mechanism to create wealth. But I'm going to discuss another 5 odd minutes, then I'm going to go for questions. So let's just quickly do the last. I'm going to ask you your question on foot and mouth, because it seems to trip us up every now and again. Yeah. What's your view?
Yeah, so Theo, I think overall herd health is this big topic. Just from a master plan perspective, it's the biggest focus in that livestock master plan, which is a great, whether you're commercial, whether you're emerging, whether you're government, we need to get this right.
We need to fix
this whole animal health situation in South Africa. It's been coming for way too long, and it is complex, but it's so big. It's eroding so many opportunities that we have in livestock sector. So from a strategic perspective, and there's now the red meat industry, the primary cluster, has done their strategic document and saying, also in partnership with government, saying what can private sector do? How can we assist? You know, the contributions that private sector can make can be significant. And the costs could be, to a large extent, bearable to you if we compare the cost-benefit. The issue is around mandates. You know, do you have the authority from private sector side, or which role could private sector play, or an independent service delivery body? Because at the end of the day, that's what we're heading for. Or in my mind, is we need to get somebody to implement and to get the services going. Now, whether this is an independent body, because the state is currently struggling with terms of implementation of a comprehensive strategy. So to what extent can we fast track the management of overall animal health through services, independent services that we can get in there. What contribution can government make? What contribution can the state make? Because we have to be realistic. There are certain functions that can only be done by government. And it's internationally. That's how the way the world works. But we need to take hands in this and say, how do we take this forward? And I think that there are tangible plans on the table. And obviously a focus should be where the origin a lot of times happens, is in the northern part of the country, those red zones. So if we can really get down there, get an alternative market for those animals shouldn't be coming down inland into the country. They shouldn't travel. They should be actually slaughtered there, processed there. There's nothing wrong with the meat. So getting markets for it. So I think we have there are real solutions on the table, and there's a real drive now to actually get this done.
I was talking to a Namibian cattle farmer, and he said to me the last time Namibia had foot and mouth was in 1963. And they're getting it right. For some other reason, now obviously he's not talking about the right north of Namibia, but luckily they've got the desert in between. So in the meat producing areas, the last time was in 1963. So it can be done, but you need proper measurements and proper policies, or first of all, you need a mechanism to identify it early enough. But then you need to work on the movement of goods. I'm going a movement of slaughtered cattle. I'm going to open the floor for questions in 2 or 3 minutes. I just want a closing remark before I open from you, Ferdi. If you look at Nampo today, and you're here today, I know you've only been here a few hours, but I pick up a shift in attitude, a shift in focus. If I look at, first of all, the quality of the exhibitions, and if you just look at the FNB, I mean, the way that it's laid out today, it's different than 5 or 10 years ago. There's a different vibe here. What would you say is the temperature, if you talk amongst farmers, in terms of how do they feel about farming in the future?
Yeah, I have to say, I can't wait to get out here and to go and look at what has happened over the last 2-3 years in terms of technology. Yeah. What we haven't seen, we haven't been here for 2 years. Well, it's now 2 years.
2 years. Yeah, 2 years we missed it.
2 years we've missed it, and there's so much that has happened in technology, and just like a constant drive for working. And we all understand the world is getting, so we've talked about the risk getting far more uncertain. To what extent can we be resilient? Like the Afrikaanse word, veerkrachtig. Yeah. So in other words,
resilient, but coming back. Building back.
You have to be, veerkrachtig is like you have to build your business in an environment that's uncertain. Yeah. So guys, the reality is our world is uncertain. To what extent can you pick from this week, what you see in Nampo, here in Nampo, can you build your business to be resilient and actually grow? Buoyant is a nice word. That you can actually grow your business in this uncertain world. And I think that's what we're seeing here in Nampo. I just get this feel for farmers. The questions that they're asking is not about, what will maize prices be next year? It's kind of a question of how can I navigate my business through these uncertainties, and what do I need to take into consideration to do it?
To be sustainable, profitable, and to be in 5 or 10 or 20 years' time.
Exactly.
I'm going to open, is there any questions from the floor? Anybody with a question or two? Any questions from the floor? Yes.
Sorry, thank you, Theo. Nice conversation. Thanks, Ferdi. Just perhaps you've asked a question about the age of the farmers, and I think there's a bit of a discrepancy, because the landowner might be the aging one, the dad, but the son's coming back to the farms, and perhaps Ferdi, from your point of view, also a generational farmer. How do you incorporate that change into a generational farmer into your business? And I think with the younger guys coming back to the farms, technology plays an important role. How do you see the future for that going forward?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, again, and I think we must not overemphasize this whole 40,300, but just to get back to that principle, if you can afford technology, it is so attractive for our youth and our young players. It's amazing. You know, having my boys already on the combine, and they are being quicker on that mapping than what I can figure this computer out. It's attractive for them. They want to do it. If you look at universities, which type of degrees they're getting into: engineering, mechatronic engineering, computer engineering. You know, there are such nice applications now, I think, that makes agriculture and let's call it the whole food system. And I think that's, even whether you're small or large, I think agriculture can be more attractive for the youth and for younger players. And I think, again, focusing on if we can tell more stories about the informal ones and get those more pronounced, and saying it shouldn't be an industry of poverty. It should be an industry of technology, of
opportunities
of growth.
If you just listen to the stories of the farmer today, when he talks about how his grandfather farmed, that was not mega farming. That was surviving, going for it, enjoying it, and in the end you have a proper asset. But it takes generations. I want to add to Dawie, what I always found interesting is if you look here at Nampo, the people around, and you compare that to what they say the average age of the farmer is, there's a gap. I don't buy that average age. I think it might be because the land is in a trust, and the trustee, when he set it up, was a certain age, or the guy at the agriculture company, they're delivering maize on his father's name. I'm not sure. And then you get to young farmer events, and there's a few hundred guys that's between 20 and 35. And I'm not sure that age thing. I think there's a great crop of young people that wants to farm, that are excited to farm, that's got a passion to farm, and I just see them coming through the whole time. And what was interesting about one of the previous Nampus that we had here, I think it was at that stage, Bayer had a very nice decision-making matrix for a maize farmer. And it came down to the simple effect that the maize farmer need to make 40 decisions in a season. And each decision will have an impact on his cost, on his yield, and on his cash flow. 40 decisions. And that is exciting from a technology point of view, from a measurement point of view, from the big data point of view. How can I get most of those decisions right? Because each and every one has an impact. So I think that the idea of farming being a struggling enterprise, unfortunately for too many people, that's still true. But I think once you get into that 300,000 gap, because that guy, small changes can make massive changes. And I agree with you. That's kind of where the focus should be to make it more inclusive.
Exactly. And those can be, as I said, these can be commercialized businesses, or they are already, in fact. Telling the story, making them bankable, market access, a number of elements that we can focus on.
Yeah.
And I'm not, we still, as I said, the 2 million households, we can still improve their livelihoods. We can still make a difference there. And that's where government really needs big programs. And it works like that across the world.
In one of the discussions 3 years ago, there was when we talked about this, a gentleman put up his hand, and he was the editor of one of the black newspapers. And he said to me that he went through university because his mother was a small farmer, and she just had enough surplus to pay for one kid to go to university. So the gearing effect of that. That's not a big farmer. She just had enough. Out of the farm, she made a surplus to put one kid into varsity, and he went to varsity. And then he was the editor of one of the newspapers. And that shows you the gearing that this can do.
Yeah, it has huge impact.
Yeah. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, Theo.
Thank you so much. Thank you for a very interesting discussion. By far the most common issue which is raised amongst our members, who are all in the small and medium enterprises sector, is around financing. production financing, even more so in the medium-term financing, and even more so in the long-term capital financing. Isn't it ironic that whilst agriculture was the best performing sector of our economy, we are struggling so much with the financing in these days? And how do you see this pan out?
So in other words, Theo, you're referring to the medium to small scale?
Yeah, medium to small scale.
Medium to small scale commercial farmer.
Yeah. The family farmers.
Yeah, and this is now specifically for South Africa, or are you talking a little bit
South
more
Africa.
Continental? Yeah. So
also, we know that in the world it is the same case. I see Guterres from the United Nations refer to the food, fuel, financing crisis in which agriculture is at the moment, or in which the world is. But even more so with the situation in the land bank today in South Africa.
Yeah, no, so you're right. I mean, we really have a development finance struggle. We have a big issue with that. And I would still argue that we have colleagues in the rest of the continent that are doing better than what we are doing in this space. In terms of financing, I almost want to say unsecured loans, or securing loans in a different way, the production financing part, to actually finance through to secure your crop and actually secure the produce that's being delivered and not the land that the farmers are sitting on. So I think there we have something to learn on. But the principle around basic development finance, where government provides some sort of a secured mechanism where you can reduce the repayments, you can reduce the interest rates. You can, and you know, this is what the old government did, man, many years ago. There were loans that were given for 20, 30 years. Softer loans where you had to reduce the repayment ability, and we understand agriculture. Agriculture works in cycles. So if you have to repay it next year, and next year's a bad year, you're out of it. And the finances also, the banks can't take that risk, the default. So somewhere we need some form of a de-risking or a loan where you have softer terms. You are the specialist in that.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm the specialist, but what I will say is what people forget is a bank's primary objective is to make sure that the depositor's funds he can get back. I mean, your salary gets put into your bank account on the 25th. You want to draw that. So the bank's primary focus is to make sure that the guy that made a deposit at the bank will get his money back. All right. Now they've got this funds. They try to earn something on it. So they earn roughly on a wholesale basis perhaps 3.5%. In that 3.5%, they have to run their business. They have to provide the equity owner of the bank, who in terms of capital adequacy is probably about 12%. He wants a return on it. So they end up with about 1.5%. Now that 1.5%, so therefore if they were to have 2 out of 50 farmers not repaying, they can't guarantee the depositor's money. They've got 1.5% to play with. And that is why you need to de-risk it. So if you've only got that, what people don't understand, they think the bank is making all the interest. It's actually making 1.5%. And the problem with that 1.5%, all the bad debts must come out of that. So if 1 or 2 or 3 of these guys default, he doesn't make money out of it. Because his primary focus is not to his primary focus is to repay the guy whose money he's custodian of. And that comes in, you need to find ways to de-risk that. So that the bank's credit can say, I can put the depositor's money on risk in agriculture. Otherwise, they are going to take a view, because what people, if you borrow from a bank, it's not your money. It's a depositor sitting somewhere's money, who says, gee, guys, I hope I get my money back. So you want to lend to, are you sure at the end of I can get my money? So that's why the de-risking, and that's where the problem lies, Theo. If you don't have mechanisms to de-risk this process, there's only limited bankability. So you need either a developmental agency, a kind of a blended finance structure agency, but you need to de-risk this. Otherwise, it's too volatile. And there are a few things that a bank doesn't like: volatility, uncertainty in terms of predictability, and then a situation where if I have to lift my hammer and have an auction, there's nothing there. So it's unfortunately, I think South Africa is failing in that respect, but I think it's the Land Bank, it's a tragedy that the Land Bank is to a large extent a non-developmental player currently. It's tragic because you need that kind of structure to assist, because that was a developmental mechanism. Wasn't the commercial farmer. The commercial farmer comes in once you're one step higher.
Correct.
But this risk process here, there's other funding required.
Correct.
And that is a sad part of our reality.
Yeah, I agree. So it's really a combination of de-risking.
Yeah.
It's a de-risking in terms of development finance, like your physical. It's the markets. It's it's like support services.
Yeah.
Extension officers.
Yeah. It's
products.
all that mix
it's this
that
whole
you require.
mix. And we have pockets of that, of success.
And unfortunately, they are not at one place.
No.
So you've got the IDC, you've got some funds from certain development agencies, you've got all these funds around. But nobody coordinates and say, let's de-risk some of this so the commercial bank can pick up the slack.
Exactly.
But it doesn't happen.
No. Exactly.
But it's if there was an easy answer, I think everybody would have. It's a major challenge, Theo. And unfortunately, I don't think there's a proper answer for that. But you're right, it's a major challenge.
And we have, one big part too that we can still mention is the transfer of land ownership as part of the package.
Yeah.
You have a huge amount of land, 4.8 million hectares sitting with government, with title, that can be transferred and that can be part of this whole de-risking and of loans and getting more finance going.
I just want to add to that. There is a nice academic study that shows that the transfer of a deed is only one element.
Correct.
Now you need the support to make that deed valuable. And only once you have the support around the deed is it really valuable. Otherwise, it's got no value.
Correct.
So without, it's almost a catch-22. You need the transfer of the deed, but you need the support service around, access to funding, take-off agreements, knowledge being shared, all of that, then that deed's got value.
Correct.
And we're kind of not there yet.
No, it's a whole package.
It's a whole package. All right, is there any other questions? Yes. Okay, I'm going to, before I ask David to wrap, from my point of view, thank you very much. Professor Ferdi Meyer, it's always an honor to have a discussion with you. And there's only probably one reason, not because you say you are a nice guy, but it's a depth of knowledge. Thank you very much. It's a privilege to have these discussions with you. Thank you, Ferdi.